I remember sitting there, clutching my cold, barely touched mug of black coffee, completely mesmerized by the sheer, unadulterated chaos unfolding directly across the conference table. The air was so thick with tension, you could practically see the sound waves of a client's voice bouncing off the sleek glass walls of the meeting room. It was one of those massive, high-stakes client pitches, the kind that determined if our human resources department was going to get the budget for the entire next quarter's staffing overhaul. And let me tell you, this was not just any client. This was Omnicorp, the whale we had been trying to land for over a year, the company that could put our HR consulting firm on the map permanently. Everyone who was anyone in our division was there, the big bosses, the account managers, and crucially, the man who was currently sweating through his crisp, expensive dress shirt, my coworker Tom. Tom was the one presenting. He was clicking through the slides that looked intimately, flawlessly familiar to me, with a false bravado that was truly sickening. His voice was too loud, too confident, booming out all the statistics, strategies, and innovative recruitment funnels that I had literally stayed up past 2 a.m. writing just 3 days prior. I was sitting quietly at the back corner, near the main HR director, Maria, supposedly there for support, but really, I was just there to witness the spectacular train wreck I knew was coming. But honestly, even I didn't anticipate how fast the train would derail. We were only on slide 8, discussing the proposed, gamified onboarding pathway, which was a genuinely brilliant idea I had cooked up involving an internal company leaderboard for new hires. The client, Mr. Harrison, a man who looked like he hadn't cracked a smile since 1985, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen, and then slowly, deliberately, put a hand up to stop Tom mid-sentence. "Excuse me, Tom," Mr. Harrison said, his voice a low, precise rumble that somehow silenced the whole enormous room. Tom stopped, a flicker of panic darting behind his eyes, which he quickly tried to mask with a practiced, smarmy grin. "Yes, Mr. Harrison? Do you have a question about the conversion metrics on the first leg of the funnel?" Tom asked, trying to sound smart and proactive. Mr. Harrison just shook his head slightly, his eyes still narrowed at the enormous projected slide, which detailed the exact cost-benefit analysis of the gamified pathway. The silence stretched out for what felt like a geological era. I could feel my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew exactly what Mr. Harrison was looking at. It was the detail I had left in, the little, tiny, almost invisible signature of ownership. Finally, Mr. Harrison pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the bottom right corner of the slide. "No, Tom. I'm wondering about this watermark. It's very faint, but it's there on every slide, overlapping the footer text. It says, Confidential Draft, L. Chen. Who is L. Chen? And why is a confidential draft being presented in a final pitch? More importantly," he paused, his gaze finally lifting from the screen to sweep across the room and land directly on my quiet corner, "why does L. Chen have the same first name as the analyst sitting right there?" My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't flinch. I just met his cold, assessing stare with what I hoped was a look of calm, quiet certainty. Tom, bless his heart, immediately started digging his own grave with a teaspoon. "Oh, that? Mr. Harrison, that's just a boilerplate, old template error. We use a lot of templates here, and sometimes an old name leaks through. Sloppy IT, you know. I assure you, I personally built this entire proposal from the ground up based on the needs I discussed with your team. It's nothing. Honestly, just an administrative oversight and artifact." He chuckled nervously, a horrible, high-pitched, desperate sound, and tried to click to the next slide, but Mr. Harrison's voice stopped him again. "No, Tom. Don't click to the next slide yet. I want to be very clear about something. In the business we do, trust and integrity are non-negotiable foundations. If you cannot even produce a clean, original, final presentation that you claim is your own work, how can I trust you with the confidential future of Omnicorp's entire staffing model?" The air was literally vibrating with a sudden shift in power. Tom was starting to sweat actual bullets, visible on his forehead under the harsh conference room lights. Before Tom could stammer out another flimsy lie, Maria, the HR director, finally spoke up from beside me. Her voice was low and dangerous, the kind of quiet authority that demanded immediate attention. She looked at the client, her face perfectly composed, and then turned a chillingly neutral expression onto Tom. "Mr. Harrison, I sincerely apologize for this unprofessional display. It seems there has been a significant breach of our internal intellectual property standards." She didn't look at me, but I knew she was looking at me, silently asking if my little trap had worked exactly as planned. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She turned back to Tom, and that's when the axe fell. "Tom, I need you to step out of the room immediately. This meeting is over for you. We will be speaking with HR and legal right away." The phrase "step out" was corporate code for "you are currently being fired." Tom's jaw dropped. He looked like a deer hit by a freight train, his face going from flushed red to an ashen, sickly gray. He tried to protest, stammering something about unfairness, but two security guards, who must have been waiting right outside the door, slid silently into the room. They politely, but firmly, motioned for him to leave. He was fired, officially, before the meeting could even end, before the coffee in my mug had a chance to get anything less than scalding hot. It was absolutely brutal, spectacular, and the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed in my entire corporate life. It's funny, because the entire week leading up to that moment, I had been an absolute wreck. The moment I realized he had stolen my pitch, my beautiful, meticulous pitch that represented months of late nights and creative genius, I had felt a rage I didn't know I possessed. But I also felt this weird, unsettling calm because I knew exactly what I had done. I had left the little bomb buried deep within the presentation, a small, hidden booby trap that only I knew about, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. And Tom, in his arrogance and laziness, had blindly carried the package right to the detonation site. And now here we were. Tom, escorted out by security, Mr. Harrison, looking faintly disgusted but impressed by the swiftness of the corporate justice, and me, Lena, still sitting in the corner, suddenly the most important person in the room. Maria stood up, smoothed down her suit jacket, and addressed the client. "Mr. Harrison, I can assure you that we take matters of IP and integrity extremely seriously. We will continue this pitch, but this time, you'll hear it from the person who actually authored it." She looked directly at me. "Lena, why don't you step up here and walk Mr. Harrison through the thinking behind your confidential draft? That's the hook. That's how it all went down. If you've ever had a coworker steal your work, your idea, or even just take credit for the successful project you killed yourself over, drop a comment right now with the place you're watching this video and the time, because I guarantee you, this story is the sweet, sweet revenge fantasy you've always wanted to live. So, let me back up a minute, because you need to understand who I am and what this pitch really meant to me. My name is Lena, and I am, or was at the time, an HR analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm. Don't let the title fool you into thinking I spent my days sorting employee files and scheduling mandatory training. No, my job was the creative, high-stakes part of HR. I specialized in strategic talent acquisition and designing engagement programs. Think of it less like paperwork and more like corporate puzzle solving, figuring out how to get the right people into the right seats using innovative methods. My office setting was the definition of open-plan chaos. We were situated in a huge, brightly lit floor of a skyscraper, all sleek glass dividers and ergonomic everything. My particular spot, my fortress of solitude, was a cramped cubicle tucked right against the north-facing window, giving me a spectacular, if distracting, view of the downtown skyline. I had been at the firm for 4 years, grinding away, always the one who delivered quietly, efficiently, and usually with a flash of genuine innovation. I wasn't the loudest person in the room. That title belonged firmly to Tom, as you'll soon find out. But I was the one who could reliably turn an idea into a fully fleshed, data-backed strategy. And the Omnicorp pitch, that was my Everest. This wasn't just another project. It was the culmination of every smart idea I'd had since I started. Omnicorp, as I mentioned, was a huge conglomerate going through a massive, difficult digital transformation. They were hemorrhaging talent, and their existing HR practices were, frankly, ancient. Our firm needed a killer idea to win them over, something that didn't just promise results but felt different, modern, and high impact. I lived and breathed that pitch for 6 straight weeks. I'm talking 8 p.m. departures, weekend coffee-fueled deep dives into their internal reports, and covering my entire cubicle wall with those huge sticky note flow charts that only made sense to me. I created a comprehensive strategy that started with a sophisticated, AI-driven candidate sourcing system and ended with that gamified onboarding pathway that Mr. Harrison had stopped the presentation on. Every single slide, all 45 of them, was meticulously researched, beautifully designed, and backed up by proprietary financial models I had built myself. I knew the presentation inside and out, the exact placement of every bullet point, the perfect color scheme, the custom-made graphs. It was less a work project and more my actual baby, something I had poured my heart and soul into, believing that finally, this was the project that would get me the visibility and the promotion I deserved. I even gave the presentation a slightly dramatic, slightly ridiculous working title in my private files, Project Phoenix, because I genuinely believed it could raise OmniCorp's HR department from the ashes. I worked on it entirely in a separate, highly secure folder on the company server, only printing out a single draft copy and a digital PDF marked confidential draft to share with Maria, our HR director, for the final internal review. And here's a small detail, a tiny thing that usually doesn't matter but became the key to everything. I always use a particular template when I create presentations that are still in development, a custom template I designed years ago for grad school. It has this incredibly faint, almost invisible watermark, a ghosted gray text across the bottom right, slightly overlapping the footer. It's impossible to remove by simply copy-pasting the slides into a new template because it's baked into the master slide design. It's an old habit, a subtle defense mechanism, and it reads, Confidential Draft, L. Chun. I remember the day I sent the final draft to Maria. I felt this incredible surge of exhaustion and relief, like I just summited that Everest I'd been climbing. Maria loved it, by the way. She called me into her office, told me it was the best, most comprehensive pitch she'd seen in years, and promised me that I would be the one leading the presentation when the big day came. That was the plan. I was going to be the hero, the analyst who landed the whale, the one who stepped up and proved her worth. I walked back to my cube feeling 10 feet tall, ready for my moment in the sun. But corporate life, as I'm sure some of you know, rarely runs according to the nice, logical plan you make in your head. Just as I was putting the finishing touches on the speaker notes, making sure every potential question was anticipated and every data point was memorized, a sudden, annoying, and ultimately catastrophic variable was introduced into my equation. And that variable was Tom. Tom, the guy who ended up getting escorted out by security in the first section of the story. He was about to change the entire trajectory of my big moment, not because he was better or smarter, but simply because he was louder and, as I would soon discover, entirely without a moral compass. I should have known things were going to go sideways the moment Maria called me into her office again a week before the pitch. She looked uncomfortable, which was rare for her. She was usually the epitome of corporate composure. Lena, she started, fiddling with a pen on her desk. There's a slight change of plans for the OmniCorp presentation. Due to some executive restructuring. Nothing to do with you, I promise. We decided the pitch needs to be fronted by a senior consultant to give it more gravitas with Mr. Harrison's team. My stomach dropped, but I knew the game. Who will be presenting? I asked, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. She sighed. Tom will be handling the main presentation, but you, of course, will be there to answer all the technical questions and provide backup. It's still your work, Lena, and we all know that. It was a consolation prize wrapped in corporate sugar, but it tasted like ashes. It meant I was now the invisible support act for my own masterpiece. And that's when I had to deal with the person who was about to turn my achievement into his blatant career-climbing vehicle. My cube was my sanctuary, a small, highly organized island in the sea of HR activity. It's where I did my best thinking, surrounded by reference books, my enormous external monitor, and a truly impressive collection of succulents, the only things in the office that listened quietly and didn't try to take credit for my work. And that's where I had practically lived while building Project Phoenix. I remember those last few nights before the pitch was finalized. The office was completely quiet, just the hum of the servers and the faint glow of the city lights outside my window. I was meticulously refining the financial projections, making sure the return on investment for the new recruiting platform was not just good, but irrefutable. I felt this deep, almost physical connection to the work, a sense of ownership that went far beyond a paycheck. This pitch was my ticket out of the analyst role and into senior strategy, and I'd earned it with every late night and every data model. When I first created the presentation, the original digital file, I had stored it in a special folder. I had this weird, superstitious habit of backing up my most important files, not just on the server, but also on a tiny, encrypted thumb drive I kept tucked away in my desk drawer just in case. It's a habit born from years of watching other people lose crucial work to server crashes or, frankly, to people like Tom. I had also gone through the trouble of converting the final version into a slightly lower resolution PDF just to send to Maria for that initial review, ensuring that the proprietary Excel models linked to the graphs couldn't be easily reverse engineered. The actual, fully editable PowerPoint master was what I called the gold copy, and it remained safely in that protected folder. Now let's talk about the specific elements of the presentation that were truly mine. It wasn't just the data. Anyone with enough patience could crunch the numbers. It was the creativity. I had developed an entirely new metric for candidate engagement, something I called the influence score, that measured a potential recruit's impact within their professional network before they were even hired. It was revolutionary, and it was the core innovation that Maria knew would impress Omnicorp. I had also spent 2 full days designing the visual look of the presentation, using a specific palette of deep blues and silvers that evoked trust and stability, deliberately moving away from our firm's usual tired, corporate red and black theme. Every transition, every image, every carefully placed white space was a deliberate choice, an act of intellectual labor. I even remember arguing with the design team about the font choice for a solid half hour, insisting on a clean, modern sans serif because it conveyed forward-thinking efficiency, which was the entire message of the pitch. These were the small, almost insignificant details that only the true creator would be obsessed with, the tiny fingerprints of authorship embedded deep within the structure. And of course, there was the watermark. I had intentionally added it using the PowerPoint master slide view, not as an image, but as a text box with very low opacity, anchored just slightly off-center in the footer area. I didn't tell Maria about it, and I certainly didn't tell Tom about it. It was my insurance policy, a silent guardian for my intellectual property, meant only to be visible under very specific lighting conditions or, critically, when projected onto a huge screen under high resolution, like the one in the main conference room. I had been so proud of that pitch that I had gone out and bought a new outfit for the presentation day, a sharp, professional blazer that made me feel like the confident, strategic woman I knew I was. I mentally rehearsed my talking points, anticipating the technical questions that might come up, focusing on how I would articulate the logic behind the influence score. I felt ready, truly ready, to prove myself. But then came the conversation with Maria, telling me Tom was taking the lead. The disappointment was crushing, yes, but it was also a warning signal. Tom was a known glory hound. He was infamous in the office for managing up, which is corporate speak for constantly kissing up to senior leadership while letting his direct reports do all the actual work. He was all flash and no substance, a walking, talking, well-dressed empty suit. He could talk a big game, but he couldn't innovate his way out of a paper bag. The idea that he would stand up there and take credit for my 6 weeks of relentless, innovative work was a bitter pill. I remember thinking, okay, Lena, this is unfair, but this is the corporate world. You will be his backup, you will answer the tough questions, and everyone who matters will still know you did the heavy lifting. I told myself to be mature, to play the long game. The firm knew I was the genius behind the pitch, and that's what mattered, right? That's what I kept repeating until I actually saw Tom's version of the final presentation file 2 days before the client meeting. Maria had forwarded me the file, simply titled, Omnicorp Final Pitch T. Stevens. I opened it up. My stomach lurched. It wasn't just inspired by my work. It wasn't just using some of my data. It was my pitch. Every single slide, every graph, every innovative concept, the influence score, the gamified onboarding pathway, the deep blue and silver color palette, even the precise font I had fought for, it was all there. He hadn't even bothered to rearrange the slides. He had simply copied my entire gold copy presentation file, changed the title on the cover slide, and slapped his own name on the bottom of the first page. It was a complete, flagrant, copy and paste job. And because he was too lazy or too careless to check the master slide, my faint, insidious watermark, confidential draft L. Chun, was still there, silently mocking his brazen plagiarism. It was in that moment, staring at the theft of my intellectual property, that my quiet resignation evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. I realized Tom hadn't just stolen my pitch, he had stolen my opportunity, and I knew I had to get it back. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. When I opened that file, Omnicorp Final Pitch, T. Stevens, and saw my entire intellectual output staring back at me, the first emotion wasn't anger. It was a cold, sick wave of disbelief. I remember actually leaning back in my chair, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes, and taking a deep, ragged breath. He hadn't changed anything. Tom had simply taken my beautiful, complex work, the result of 6 weeks of strategic thinking and late-night graphing, and slapped his arrogant name on it. He didn't even bother to rename the graphs or rephrase the executive summary. It was an insult to my intelligence and a monument to his own spectacular laziness. Now, let me tell you about Tom Stevens. He wasn't malicious in the cartoon villain way, he was worse. He was the kind of guy who genuinely believed his own hype. He had the loudest laugh in the office, a penchant for expensive, slightly too tight suits, and a relentless ability to network vertically. He spent 90% of his time talking about work and 10% actually doing it, and that 10% was usually just delegating whatever Maria or the other senior managers gave him. He was a master of corporate performance art, perpetually looking busy, perpetually talking about leveraging synergies and driving dynamic outcomes, all while secretly checking his stock portfolio under his desk. He came from a privileged background, he had an MBA from a good school, which he mentioned at least once per meeting, and he walked around with this air of entitlement, like success was just naturally owed to him. He never saw me, Lena, the quiet HR analyst in the corner, as a competitor or even an equal. I was just part of the office furniture, a useful resource that produced data he could then present. To him, stealing my pitch wasn't a moral failure, it was just an efficient use of company resources, my resources. The day after I discovered the theft, I was working at my cube when I heard that booming, obnoxious laugh just a few feet away. Tom was standing next to the coffee station, chatting up Sarah from marketing, casually holding the printout of my pitch. "Yeah, I've got the Omnicorp thing completely locked down," he was saying, loud enough for the entire quadrant of cubicles to hear. "Honestly, I pulled an all-nighter on this. The data models alone were brutal, but I think I finally cracked the code on their talent hemorrhaging issue." He paused, took a dramatic sip of coffee, and dropped his voice, just enough to make his next words feel conspiratorial, but still totally audible. "Maria's ecstatic. She said it's the most innovative pitch she's seen in 5 years. Had to pull in all the stops to make sure this thing was bulletproof. Gotta impress Mr. Harrison, right?" I felt a flash of pure, white-hot fury. He wasn't just stealing the work. He was stealing the narrative, the credit, and my moment. He was establishing the official, false record. Tom Stevens, the genius who saved the day with his all-nighter. What really twisted the knife was the way he dismissed the work I had literally slaved over. Pulled an all-nighter was probably his way of describing the 30 minutes it took him to copy the file. I sat there, frozen, listening to him bask in the reflected glory of my effort. I wanted to leap up, grab the printout, and scream, "That's my influence score. You don't even know what font that is." But I didn't. That moment of public bragging, that casual, arrogant dismissal of my effort, was the turning point that shifted my emotional response from simple outrage to calculated strategy. If I had jumped up right then, it would have been messy. It would have been my word against his. He would have played the stressed-out genius card, claiming I was misunderstanding a collaborative effort, or worse, that I was jealous of a senior role. The HR director, Maria, would have been forced to intervene, and the whole ugly mess would have potentially ruined the Omnicorp pitch for the firm, making me look like the disruptive, emotional analyst. I would have won the moral high ground, but I would have lost my professional standing. But when I heard him brag, when I heard him tell Sarah and anyone else listening that he cracked the code, a plan started forming. It wasn't a plan based on an immediate, satisfying outburst. It was a cold, Precise, corporate revenge plan that utilized the very trap I had built into the presentation, the watermark. I knew Maria was compromised. She clearly saw the value of the pitch and, probably, the political value of letting Tom, the senior consultant, front it for the client. She had probably convinced herself that since she knew I created it, that was enough. It wasn't. For me, the only way to win was to expose Tom's dishonesty in a way that was undeniable, public, and force the hand of management, specifically, in front of the high-stakes client. I went back to my computer and stared at the OmniCorp final pitch, T. Stevens file. I scrolled through the slides slowly, verifying that the low-opacity watermark, confidential draft L. Chun, was indeed still there on every single page. He hadn't noticed it. He hadn't looked closely enough. He hadn't bothered to check the master slide. His laziness, which was the source of his theft, was also going to be the source of his downfall. It was beautiful. I made a final, deliberate choice. I wouldn't say a word to Maria. I wouldn't call Tom out privately. I was going to let him step onto the stage, give him the spotlight he craved, and let him deliver my performance. I was going to let him become completely invested in the lie, making the eventual revelation all the more catastrophic. I would sit quietly in the back, just as Maria had instructed, and watch my quiet little booby trap detonate with perfect, professional timing. I closed the file, smiled to myself, and started practicing my most convincing, innocent bystander expression. The game was on. The days leading up to the OmniCorp pitch were a bizarre, silent torture. Tom, now fully convinced of his own brilliance, was insufferable. He was practically bouncing off the glass walls of the office, radiating this toxic blend of arrogance and misplaced confidence. He kept pacing around the HR area, holding the physical printout of my pitch, and stopping by people's desks to offer snippets of his supposed wisdom. Just finalizing the narrative arc for the gamified pathway, he'd announced to no one in particular, or, gotta make sure the visual rhetoric on the influence score slide hits just right. The words felt like sandpaper on my nerves, because every single phrase he uttered was a lie, a theft, a total sham. My own emotional state was a mess, a tight coil of betrayal and strategic calm. The initial fury had subsided, replaced by a cold, surgical determination. But it was still a deep, personal gut punch. You have to understand, I didn't just spend time on this. I poured myself into it. When you work in a corporate environment, your ideas are your currency. They are the visible proof of your value. To have that taken, to see someone else casually claim the credit for something that defined my professional worth, it felt like a violation. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about dignity and authorship. I vividly remember one afternoon, the day before the pitch, sitting at my desk, trying to review old financial reports, but my eyes kept drifting to Tom's empty chair. He was likely out schmoozing, preparing his lies. I felt this intense pressure in my chest, a mix of anxiety and a need for justice. I kept running the scenario over and over in my head. What if the client didn't see the watermark? What if the projector was fuzzy? What if Maria found out about my little trap beforehand and forced me to remove it to save face? The stakes suddenly felt astronomical. I was risking not just my career progression, but potentially my standing within the firm if my plan failed and made us look bad in front of OmniCorp. I considered a secondary challenge, the moral dilemma of letting my firm potentially lose the client deal. If Tom completely botched the presentation because he didn't actually understand the core metrics, that would hurt everyone. My plan relied on the intellectual property theft being exposed before the lack of subject knowledge could damage the deal too much. It was a high-wire act. I reached out to one person, Greg, the lead IT specialist. Greg was a quiet, slightly cynical guy who loved coffee and hated corporate arrogance, which made him a silent ally to anyone who did actual work. I walked over to his corner, pretending I was having a vague issue with my display settings. "Hey, Greg," I said softly, leaning over his desk, my voice low. "Quick question. For the main conference room projector, the one we're using tomorrow for the OmniCorp pitch, how's the resolution on that thing these days?" Greg didn't even look up from his monitor. "Best one in the building, Lena. New 4K laser projector. It's so sharp, you can practically see the dust motes on the presenter's tie." "Why?" Worried about your graphs. Not worried about my graphs, I said, a slight, internal smile forming. Just making sure everything's perfectly clear for Mr. Harrison. You know how Maria is about presentation quality. Perfectly clear. Check, Greg affirmed, giving me a thumbs up without context. That conversation was crucial. It confirmed that the one element I was relying on, the faint, low-opacity watermark, would be rendered clearly enough on the high-tech screen to be noticed by a meticulous client like Mr. Harrison. My internal pressure gauge relaxed a notch. The emotional stakes were heightened by Tom's own actions. He wasn't just stealing the work, he was actively undermining me. He started giving me instructions on how to support his presentation. He called me over to his desk, gesturing grandly at the slides. Okay, Lena, listen up, he said, tapping the slide about the influence score with a pen. When I get to this metric, I need you to be ready to pipe up and talk about the data collection process. Make it sound very technical, very dry. That way, I can focus on the strategic impact. You know, the high-level stuff. The sheer condescension was breathtaking. He was telling me to make myself boring, to retreat into technical obscurity, so he could shine on the strategic concepts, the very concepts I invented. Got it, Tom, I replied, my voice flat, giving absolutely nothing away. Just the data collection process. I'll stick to the technical weeds. Perfect, he said, not noticing the irony dripping from my tone. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? Right, I echoed, my mind already calculating. His arrogance was making my decision easier. The idea that he thought I would willingly stand by and be his glorified footnote solidified my commitment to the plan. I knew he was relying on me to be the good, quiet soldier, to be invisible, to back up his lies with my legitimate technical data. He was so focused on the grandeur of his performance that he was completely blind to the bomb I had planted and was now actively nurturing. I was going to let him present my work, let him stand in the full, blinding light of a stolen moment, and I was going to let the tiny, gray text at the bottom of the screen do the talking. The wait was agonizing, but the anticipation of that moment of truth kept me steady and focused. Tom's casual bragging didn't just stop with Sarah and marketing. It became a full-blown whisper campaign designed to preemptively cement his authorship. He was weaving this elaborate corporate mythology around himself, and every lie he told tightened the noose around his own neck. The secondary challenge, the layer of conflict that deepened the engagement for me, was navigating the office politics while keeping my secret safe. I had to look like a supportive team player to Maria and the other HR managers, while simultaneously feigning ignorance about Tom's spectacular levels of arrogance. It was an exhausting performance, but one I committed to fully. The day before the pitch, Tom started openly managing the presentation file itself, which was another opportunity for him to brag and another chance for me to verify my insurance policy was still active. He called an impromptu huddle by the large collaborative screen in the center of the office. Maria was there, along with a few other directors, including Mr. Henderson, the head of strategy, a man whose opinion carried serious weight. Okay, team, just a quick run-through of the flow, Tom announced, projecting the first slide of the deck. I stood quietly near the back, my heart beating a steady, silent drum against my ribs. The opening is strong, he continued, pointing at the title slide, the one he had simply renamed. But the real genius, if I may say so myself, is in the data on the influence score and the sheer operational efficiency of the gamified onboarding pathway. He clicked quickly through the slides, moving too fast for anyone to really absorb the content, but just fast enough to make it look like he was intimately familiar with every detail. He spent a solid 5 minutes talking about the influence score, using all the buzzwords I had carefully crafted into the abstract of my proposal, but he was stumbling over the actual logic. He talked about leveraging dynamic outreach, but when Mr. Henderson asked a quick, penetrating question about the statistical regression model I had used to validate the score, Tom just waved his hand dismissively. The regression model is a bit too technical for this overview, Mr. Henderson, Tom said, with a dismissive chuckle that sounded strained. We'll leave those statistical weeds to the analysts. The core takeaway is the strategic value. It was pathetic. He didn't even know the name of the model. He couldn't articulate the why behind the what. And that's what really solidified my decision. He wasn't just stealing a document. He was attempting to cash a check he couldn't cover, relying on his title and confidence to mask his complete lack of comprehension. His performance was not only an insult to my hard work, but a serious professional risk for the entire firm. Maria, ever the corporate politician, jumped in smoothly. Tom is focusing on the big picture strategy, Mr. Henderson. But rest assured, our analyst team, specifically Lena, can walk you through the full statistical validation at any time. She gave me a tight, professional smile that basically said, "You handle the tedious, boring details, and we'll let Tom get the credit." I nodded politely, feeling that cold fury return. They wanted me to be the safety net for his lie. They wanted me to be the invisible technical support that made his grand performance look legitimate. But as Tom continued to click through the presentation, projecting the slides onto the large, bright screen, I casually, but meticulously, scanned the bottom right corner of the projected images. Just as Greg had promised, the resolution was pristine. There it was, faint but undeniable, a ghosted gray against the deep blue background, clear enough to be seen if you were looking for it, especially when frozen on a slide. Confidential draft L. Chun. The other directors, focused on Tom's performance and the big data points, weren't noticing it. The watermark was designed to blend slightly to be part of the footer noise. It was waiting for a specific kind of person to find it, a meticulous, slightly skeptical, high-level client who pays attention to details, exactly the kind of reputation Mr. Harrison had. Later that afternoon, Tom stopped by my desk, leaning his bulky frame over my cubicle wall. His face was beaming. "Lena, just want to say thanks, truly," he said, in a voice that was way too warm and entirely fake. "You've been great support on this. Honestly, the prep has been brutal. But with this presentation, I think I'm finally going to get that senior director title. And when I do, I'll be sure to remember the little people who helped me get there." The condescension was a final, perfectly delivered insult. The little people. He didn't even recognize me as the source of his entire success. He saw me as a minor logistical hurdle he had to graciously acknowledge. "I'm happy to help the firm land OmniCorp, Tom," I replied, keeping my expression entirely neutral, my eyes focused on my keyboard. I deliberately used the word firm, not you. "That's the spirit," he beamed, completely missing the passive-aggressive slight. "Just make sure you have all the technical data ready to go for the Q&A. You know how these big shots like to dig into the weeds. And I'll be busy maintaining the strategic narrative." I watched him walk away, feeling a wave of certainty wash over me. I had considered telling Maria, going through the proper channels. But after seeing Tom's performance, seeing Maria's willingness to enable his theft for the sake of a smooth pitch, and hearing him call me a little person, my mind was made up. This was no longer about a respectful internal HR dispute. This was about a spectacular public lesson in integrity, and I was holding the match. I knew what I had to do. I had to let him walk into that conference room tomorrow, let him present the pitch of his life, and let the tiny, gray watermark be his undoing. It was a risky strategy, but the only one that guaranteed an undeniable, unassailable, and thoroughly satisfying justice. The decision was final, set in stone, and terrifyingly risky. I was going to let him present it. My final, calculated choice was to sit back and watch Tom step right into the trap, armed with my intellectual property and his own spectacular arrogance. This wasn't about spite anymore. It was about the cold, hard logic of intellectual property protection and the necessity of justice being served publicly and undeniably. I spent the night before the presentation running through every possible variable. What if he had somehow managed to get rid of the watermark last minute? What if he pulled the whole old template excuse that he ended up trying to use in the actual meeting? I knew I needed to be ready for his denial. The entire success of the plan hinged on two things: Mr. Harrison's meticulousness and the fact that Tom, in his hurry and hubris, had overlooked a detail that was fundamentally part of the master slide. I arrived at the office early on the day of the pitch. The atmosphere was buzzing with nervous energy. The OmniCorp pitch was a big deal, the kind of deal that got written up in the internal newsletter. Tom was already there, pacing the hallways, practicing his power poses and greeting everyone with that insincere, over-the-top charm of his. He even tried to give me a little motivational pep talk. "Morning, Lena. Big day. Just remember, you're the safety net. Keep that tech support game strong, alright? I'll handle the sizzle, you handle the steak. He actually winked. I just nodded, giving him a bland, professional smile that didn't reach my eyes. I felt absolutely nothing toward him but a strange, clinical detachment, like an assassin watching her target casually walk toward the detonation point. Before the clients arrived, Maria pulled Tom and me into a quick huddle outside the main conference room. She looked stressed, adjusting her jacket constantly. "All right, team. This is it," she said, her voice tight. "Tom, remember to focus on the strategic partnership. Hit the high points. Don't get lost in the weeds. Lena, you'll be sitting at the back, managing the Q&A queue, and you only speak when directed, specifically for technical validation. We need this to look seamless and executive level. No surprises, please. Just smooth sailing." The irony of her saying no surprises was not lost on me. I was a ticking time bomb, and she was handing the detonator to the thief. Tom, of course, was brimming with unwarranted confidence. "Don't worry, Maria. I've rehearsed the key narratives extensively. This is going to be stellar. I've got the full deck memorized. The data flow, the narrative coherence, it's all locked in. We've got this." He then went to plug his laptop into the massive projection system. This was the most critical moment of preparation. He opened the file, and the title slide, Omnicorp Final Pitch, T. Stevens, flashed onto the 4K screen. I watched like a hawk, and there it was, faint but visible in the bottom right corner, a subtle, ghostly assurance. Confidential draft, L. Chun. It was exactly as I had intended. Tom hadn't seen it, or he'd chosen to ignore it, thinking it was just a cosmetic glitch that no one important would notice. His laziness had blinded him, and his arrogance had convinced him that his name on the cover was enough to trump any other detail. I took my assigned seat in the back corner of the room, next to the wall, far enough away from the main table to be unobtrusive, but close enough to witness everything. My heart was pounding, but it was a cold, rhythmic beat of adrenaline, not panic. I was ready. When Mr. Harrison and his team walked in, the atmosphere changed instantly. Mr. Harrison was exactly as described, precise, stone-faced, and carrying this palpable air of authority. He didn't shake hands effusively. He gave firm, quick nods and immediately settled in, pulling out a slim notebook and an expensive pen. He looked like the kind of person who read the fine print on everything multiple times. He was the perfect audience for my hidden detail. Tom started the presentation, and for the first 7 slides, he was doing well. He was polished, he was loud, he was articulate, even if he was regurgitating my prose. He used his big hand gestures and his smooth, practiced cadence. Maria was nodding, slightly relieved. The other directors were looking impressed. Tom was coasting on my genius, and it was excruciating to watch. Every word that came out of his mouth was a betrayal, a theft, an unearned victory. But I knew the turning point was coming. It was on slide 8, the one detailing the financial models of the gamified onboarding pathway, the section I was most proud of. This slide was data-heavy, full of intricate charts and proprietary numbers. It was the kind of detail that only the author could truly explain. Tom slowed down, his eyes darting between his laptop screen and the projected image, clearly trying to remember the key points I had written in the speaker notes. He hit the clicker. The slide filled the entire wall. It was bright, detailed, and utterly convincing. And then, Tom started speaking, but his voice sounded less sure, slightly shaky as he tried to fake knowledge he didn't possess. He was trying to sound like a strategist, but he sounded like a reader. It was in that moment, when the slide was frozen on the screen, showing all those beautiful proprietary numbers, that Mr. Harrison's hand went up. He pointed, not at the metrics, not at the graphs, but at the bottom right corner. He had seen it. The faint, subtle, professional watermark, confidential draft, L. Chun, had caught the eye of the one man in the room who prioritized integrity above everything else. The trap was sprung. The room went completely silent when Mr. Harrison raised his hand and stopped Tom. The silence was heavy, pregnant with expectation. Tom, who had just been hitting his stride on the fraudulent presentation, deflated instantly. His practiced smile froze on his face. He was so far into his performance that he genuinely seemed confused that anyone would dare interrupt the flow of his brilliance. "Excuse me, Tom," Mr. Harrison said again, that low, precise rumble of his voice cutting through the silence. I'm not questioning the conversion metrics, though we will get to those. I'm asking about the image quality. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the bottom of the projected slide. Specifically, this very faint, ghosted text in the bottom right corner, overlapping your footer. It appears to be a watermark, and it reads, Confidential Draft, L. Chun. Tom's eyes darted to the screen, then to his own laptop, and then around the room. I could see the exact moment the realization hit him. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like poorly set plaster. He hadn't just forgotten to check the master slide. He hadn't even registered that such a detail existed. In his haste and contempt, he had stolen the file wholesale and focused only on the content, not the structure. The rising drama was palpable. Every eye in the room, Maria's, the other directors, Mr. Harrison's team, was now fixed on Tom. His confidence, his sole currency, was rapidly dissolving. He attempted the cover-up, the desperate, flimsy lie I had predicted. Oh, that? Mr. Harrison, that is a complete IT glitch, I assure you. Tom stammered, his voice suddenly 3 octaves higher than it was moments ago. He forced a strained chuckle that sounded more like a dying cough. We use standardized templates here, and sometimes an old name leaks through. It's an artifact from a previous version, from an analyst who worked on background research. Sloppy admin work, honestly. I've been meaning to submit a ticket to IT to clean up these old templates. He was trying to paint the watermark as a bureaucratic error, a meaningless footnote, and me, the actual author, as a mere background research analyst. The sheer audacity of the lie, even when he was clearly trapped, was stunning. He tried to quickly click to the next slide to make the evidence disappear, but Mr. Harrison was faster. Stop, Mr. Harrison commanded, his voice sharp now. He didn't raise it, but the change in tone was a hammer blow. Tom, I didn't ask you to explain an IT error. I asked about the source of the material. I am a detail-oriented man, and that faint text is on every single one of the 8 slides we have seen so far. It has a high-level designation, Confidential Draft, and it has a name, L. Chun. And as I noted earlier, he paused, looking directly at Maria, the HR director, who was now staring daggers at Tom. We have an employee named Lena Chun sitting right there, taking notes, who is listed on the agenda as the technical expert for this presentation. Are you telling me that the person who did the background research on this pitch, whose name appears on every confidential slide, is sitting right here? If so, why isn't she the one presenting the strategic outcomes? He didn't need me to confess. He didn't need Maria to confirm. He had used logic, observation, and the physical evidence on the screen to connect the dots entirely on his own. The trap had worked perfectly, and now the client himself was demanding the truth. The room suddenly felt about 100 degrees hotter. Maria, who had been trying to project calm professionalism, was clearly furious. Her silence was deafening. She knew this was an unmitigated disaster, not just for Tom, but for the firm's reputation. Tom, seeing his desperate lie failing, shifted tactics, trying to salvage the situation by suddenly embracing me in his stolen narrative. He pointed at me, a frantic, wet sheen on his forehead. Yes, Mr. Harrison. Lena is L. Chun. But this is a collaborative effort. Lena provided the technical data, the raw numbers. I took that raw material and structured it into the final strategic presentation you see before you. I built the narrative arc. That's what senior consultants do. We synthesize. It's her numbers, but it's my strategy. She just forgot to clean the template after sending me the initial draft file for my review. The denial was pathetic, but the last part, my strategy, was the final straw. It was my strategy, my influence score, my gamified pathway. He was still trying to steal the credit for the intellectual core of the work, even when the noose was tightening. Maria finally broke her silence, her voice a low, lethal hum that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. She spoke to Tom, but her words were meant for the entire room, especially Mr. Harrison. Tom, that pitch was delivered to you as a complete, fully validated presentation, not raw data. I personally reviewed it from Lena. Did you, or did you not, copy the full presentation file, change the title page, and then neglect to check the master slide, which contains the author's designation that Lena specifically built into her templates. She didn't wait for his answer. She looked at Mr. Harrison, her face a mask of professional regret. Mr. Harrison, I deeply regret this professional failure. Lena's work on this pitch is entirely original and represents months of dedicated effort. The intellectual property belongs solely to Lena Chen. Tom's actions constitute a clear and undeniable breach of our company's ethical and IP policy. We do not tolerate plagiarism. It was over. Tom was officially exposed by the highest-ranking person in the room. He looked wildly between Maria and the client, his jaw slack. He stammered, but the firm, Maria, we need this account. Maria simply held up a hand. No, Tom. We need integrity. We can't build a professional relationship on a foundation of deceit. She pressed a small button under the conference table, a silent signal, and a moment later, the door slid open and 2 security guards stepped in. It was a corporate firing executed with swift, surgical precision. The moment the security guards entered the conference room, the air pressure seemed to drop to 0. Tom was cornered, his face a horrifying mixture of outrage and sheer, unadulterated terror. The drama was now at an all-time peak, a complete, unscripted implosion in front of the most important client our HR division had been courting. This is absurd. Maria, you can't do this. Tom practically shrieked, his voice cracking. He was completely abandoning the veneer of professionalism, acting like a cornered animal. I told you, it was a simple template error. Lena just needs to fix her files. She's the analyst. I'm the senior consultant. The firm needs this deal, and you're going to throw it away over a tiny cosmetic mistake. He was so deeply invested in his own lie that he couldn't grasp the reality. The tiny cosmetic mistake was a direct result of his wholesale plagiarism, and the client, Mr. Harrison, was watching every single panicked, unethical move. Tom actually took a step toward Maria, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at her. This is an overreaction, Maria. You're putting politics over the client, he shouted. Maria didn't flinch. She just stood there, perfectly composed, radiating an authority that Tom had never possessed, even with his fancy title. Tom, your professional ethics are now in question in front of a major client. Furthermore, you have accused a junior colleague of creating faulty, unprofessional work to cover up your own intentional theft of intellectual property. Your employment with this firm is terminated immediately. Please gather your essential belongings and leave the premises with these gentlemen. One of the security guards, a large, very calm man with a pleasant but firm demeanor, stepped closer to Tom and gently placed a hand on his arm. Tom violently shook off the hand. Get your hands off me. I'm calling legal. I'm calling HR. Tom roared. He completely forgot that Maria was the HR director and that the firm's entire legal team was already briefed on protocols for IP theft. The client, Mr. Harrison, was watching the spectacle with a look that was hard to decipher, part disgust, part professional curiosity. Tom's eyes then landed on me, sitting quietly in my corner. He fixed me with a look of pure, venomous hatred, the kind that pierces through layers of corporate polish. He suddenly lunged toward me, his face contorted. You set this up. You left that damn thing there on purpose, you little snake. Before he could get within striking distance of my desk, the other security guard smoothly intercepted him. The whole room gasped. Maria instantly stepped forward. Mr. Harrison, my sincere apologies for this unbelievable breach of conduct. We are ensuring a safe and professional environment. Tom was being physically restrained, and he was still screaming accusations at me. You'll pay for this, Lena. You think you're so smart. You think you can. His voice was cut off as the security guards expertly and efficiently ushered him out the conference room door, which slid shut with a soft, final whoosh, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 90 seconds, but it felt like an hour-long, high-budget corporate thriller. Once the door was shut, Maria let out a long, slow breath. She didn't look at me, but she addressed the room, regaining her composure instantly. Again, Mr. Harrison, my profound apologies. That kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable and is not representative of our firm's values. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, picking up his pen. He actually cracked a slight, dry smile. Maria, let me be frank. We are a firm looking for a partner with integrity and backbone. Frankly, seeing how swiftly and definitively you dealt with an internal ethical problem tells me more about your company's values than any presentation could. I appreciate the transparency, however uncomfortable the method was. Then he looked straight at Maria, but nodded his head toward me in the corner. Now, if Ms. Chun is the true author of the gamified onboarding pathway and the influence score, the innovative parts of this proposal that truly interest us, I think we should hear the rest of this pitch from the person who actually wrote it. Lena, please come up and present your work. We are on slide 8. Walk us through the financial validation for your onboarding pathway. You have the floor. The feeling that washed over me was a strange mix of vindication and professional clarity. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. I stood up, smoothing down my sharp blazer, and walked to the front of the room. As I passed Maria, she gave me a look that was equal parts shock, grudging respect, and relief. She had been saved by my plan. I stood behind the podium, Tom's laptop still displaying my slide, and felt the weight of every late night and every data model I had built. I adjusted the microphone and looked Mr. Harrison directly in the eye. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice calm, clear, and professional. My name is Lena Chun, and I authored this presentation. I would be happy to walk you through the logic behind the influence score and the proprietary financial model for the gamified onboarding pathway. To answer your previous question, the projected ROI is validated using a recursive statistical model based on. And with that, I launched into the presentation, delivering my masterpiece with the confidence of someone who actually understood every single number on the screen. The drama was over, and the real pitch, my pitch, had finally begun. It was the moment I had earned, a victory that was hard-won, satisfying, and completely professional. The immediate aftermath of Tom's spectacular implosion was a high-stakes, surreal blur. Once the conference room door closed on his furious, receding form, the atmosphere didn't just calm down. It snapped into a state of hyper-focused professionalism. Mr. Harrison, the client, who was our ultimate judge, looked momentarily thoughtful, then simply nodded and gestured for me to continue. The security drama was over, and now the actual work had to be proven. I stood there, feeling the weight of the client's scrutiny, but it wasn't the fearful scrutiny Tom had been under. It was the attention of a serious buyer who needed assurance that the product he was interested in, the innovative ideas, was legitimate. My voice, which had been tight with suppressed fury moments ago, came out strong and steady. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I repeated, taking a deep breath and clicking back to the relevant slide. I didn't need notes. I had lived this data. The projected ROI for the gamified onboarding pathway is validated using a recursive statistical model based on a 2-tier control group analysis. As you can see in the lower right graph, the crucial factor is the predicted 35% reduction in 90-day voluntary turnover. I went deep into the weeds, the very technical weeds Tom had tried to assign me to. But suddenly, those weeds were the most important flowers in the room. I explained the logic behind the influence score, detailing exactly how the metric was derived from public data sets and predictive modeling, and how it directly addressed Omnicorp's specific talent attrition issues. I spoke with the genuine authority of someone who had built every single component from the ground up. Mr. Harrison and his team were engaged. They weren't just listening, they were asking sharp, intelligent questions, digging into the methodology and the assumptions. And I had the answers for every single one of them. Questions about margin of error, data sampling bias, and integration points with their existing HRIS system, questions Tom would have completely fumbled. My thoroughness, born of genuine authorship, was now the strongest counterargument to Tom's attempt at deceit. Meanwhile, Maria, the HR director, was sitting there quietly observing. Her expression had shifted from strained relief to a kind of quiet awe. She was watching me, the quiet analyst she had relegated to the backup role, not just salvage a disastrous situation, but turn it into an undeniable demonstration of my competence and integrity. She must have realized how badly she had misjudged the situation, prioritizing corporate appearance, Tom's senior consultant title, over actual substance, my work. During a brief moment when Mr. Harrison was conferring with his colleague, Maria leaned over and spoke to me, her voice a barely audible whisper. Lena, I didn't realize he had copied the entire pitch. I assumed it was a collaborative draft that he was just taking the lead on. That watermark was brilliant. You saved this, and you saved our firm's reputation. I simply gave her a brief, non-committal nod, keeping my focus on the clients. This wasn't the time for a heart-to-heart or an I told you so. The immediate focus was the pitch. My action spoke louder than any words I could exchange with Maria. As I finished the core presentation, detailing the rollout strategy, Mr. Harrison put down his pen. The finality of his sound echoed in the room. "Lena," he said, addressing me directly, and dropping the formal MS Chun. "Thank you. Your presentation is thorough, and the level of detail and innovation in the models is exactly what we were hoping for. Frankly, your ability to articulate the why behind the what is extremely impressive." He paused, looking at Maria. "I think we have seen enough to know that the substance of this proposal is exactly what Omnicorp needs." The relief in the room was palpable. Maria's shoulders visibly relaxed. We had landed the whale, but the drama wasn't quite over for Tom. Maria stood up. "Mr. Harrison, we can draw up the final contract immediately. And before we move on, I want to formally address the internal issue. We have initiated a full internal investigation into Tom Stevens' conduct, but the immediate decision is clear: termination for cause. This includes full documentation of intellectual property theft and a note on his employment record regarding gross professional misconduct." She looked at me and then back at Mr. Harrison. "As for Lena, she is the sole proprietor of the intellectual property that forms this proposal, and she will be the lead consultant on the Omnicorp account going forward. This is a non-negotiable condition of the partnership." It was the final, satisfying twist. Not only was Tom fired, but his firing directly resulted in my immediate promotion and recognition as the account lead, leapfrogging the senior consultant title I was initially angling for. Tom's desperate act of malice resulted in the absolute pinnacle of corporate justice for me. The meeting concluded shortly after, not with a tense negotiation, but with a handshake agreement based on trust and a proven product. As Mr. Harrison left, he stopped by my side and lowered his voice slightly. "Lena, never let anyone take credit for your genius. You have a very bright future ahead of you." That vote of confidence, coming from such a highly respected corporate leader, meant more than any internal promotion ever could. The immediate drama had subsided, but the resolution was far from complete. While Tom was being escorted off the premises, and I was successfully salvaging the Omnicorp pitch, the corporate machinery of justice was just starting to turn. Maria, the HR director, was the pivotal figure in this resolution, and she handled the aftermath with the same ruthless efficiency she had used to dispatch Tom. The first step was to finalize the Omnicorp deal. Having seen my competence and Maria's decisive action, Mr. Harrison was fully on board. The contract was verbally agreed upon within the hour, a significant victory directly attributable to the integrity and quality of my work and the unexpected drama that validated our firm's ethical stance. The fact that the entire event, the theft, the exposure, the firing, had all happened in front of him ironically cemented their trust in us. Once the clients had left, Maria immediately called for an emergency meeting with the 2 remaining directors who had been in the pitch. I was told to wait in her office. When she finally ushered me in, her expression was grave, but her eyes held a new, deep respect. "Lena, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair. "First, thank you. You didn't just save that pitch, you protected the firm's reputation by allowing us to address a major ethical failure in real time. That subtle watermark, it was brilliant. You planned this, didn't you?" I didn't lie. I simply stated the facts with quiet professionalism. "I suspected Tom would take the file, Maria. I put the watermark there months ago as a professional safeguard. Once I saw the presentation file was an exact copy, I realized that calling him out privately would have resulted in a messy, deniable dispute. Letting the client discover the irrefutable evidence was the only way to ensure the truth was undeniable and the consequences were immediate and proportional." Maria nodded slowly, processing. "Undeniable and proportional. That's exactly what it was. Tom is already off the property. His access has been revoked. Legal and HR are compiling the full file for termination for cause, documenting the theft of intellectual property. This will follow him, Lena. He won't be able to just hop to another senior consultant role easily. This is a complete professional implosion. It wasn't just satisfying, it was absolute justice. Tom hadn't just lost his job. He had lost his narrative, his credibility, and his career momentum in the most spectacular, public way possible. His arrogance had cost him everything. The resolution didn't stop there. Maria had made a non-negotiable promise to Mr. Harrison. I was to be the lead consultant. She formalized that immediately. As of today, Lena, you are promoted to senior strategy consultant, effective immediately, with a corresponding increase in salary and bonus structure. Your primary focus is now the Omnicorp account. You earned this, not just by creating the pitch, but by having the clarity and control to execute such a high-stakes strategy under extreme pressure. It was more than I had initially hoped for. I had leapfrogged the position Tom held, bypassing months, maybe years of corporate politics. The quiet analyst in the corner was now a senior consultant leading the biggest account in the division, and the change wasn't based on networking or self-promotion, but on proven, undeniable merit. Later that afternoon, the internal gossip machine, which had momentarily stalled after the drama, roared back to life. People were whispering, not about the scandal, but about me. The people who had heard Tom bragging, like Sarah from marketing and Mr. Henderson, now looked at me with a mix of awe and slight apprehension. They knew I was the person who did the work, and more importantly, they knew I was the person who refused to let my work be stolen. I didn't have to brag, the story was already circulating. I received a flood of emails and quick drive-by congratulations. Not just good job notes, but serious, sincere acknowledgments. That was incredible, Lena. I knew you were the brains behind that. And one simply saying, integrity wins. I remember walking back to my old cube later that day to gather my few personal things. Tom's area was completely empty, his desk cleared out, his nameplate gone. It was like he had never existed, wiped clean from the corporate landscape. I looked at the empty space where his arrogance used to occupy so much room. The contrast was stark. My quiet, meticulous hard work resulted in a promotion and professional triumph. His lazy, arrogant shortcut led to total, immediate failure. The final, satisfying flourish of the resolution came when I sat down at my new office. Maria, in a gesture that truly signified my new status, moved me out of the cramped cubicle and into a small, but private, corner office with a full glass wall overlooking the city, the kind of office Tom had always desperately craved but never achieved. I sat down at the mahogany desk, placed my favorite succulent next to the monitor, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was open the original presentation file. I stared at the faint, gray text, confidential draft, L. Chun. It wasn't just a watermark anymore. It was a trophy. The quiet after the storm was the most satisfying part of the entire ordeal. The firm landed the Omnicorp account. I was officially installed in my new senior strategy consultant office, and Tom Stevens was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the break room. The ultimate twist in this story isn't just that Tom was fired, it's what happened to me and the shift in the office culture. Before the pitch, I was an important resource, a talented analyst who delivered results, but I was invisible to the people who held the true power, the people like Mr. Harrison. I was often overlooked in favor of louder, flashier colleagues like Tom, whose confidence masked a profound lack of substance. The theft, painful as it was, forced me into the spotlight and, critically, made my genius undeniable. My work ethic didn't change, but my professional perception did. I didn't need to be loud, my actions had roared. My quiet confidence was now backed by the most powerful story in the firm. She was the one who was right, and she had the control to prove it at the highest level. Maria, my HR director, evolved from a skeptical supervisor to a powerful sponsor. She didn't just give me the promotion, she actively used my story as an example in subsequent internal meetings. She referenced the importance of internal integrity and the value of intellectual property. She told the story, with the necessary corporate editing, of course, of how the true author, the one with the detail and the integrity, was the one who ended up leading the account. This wasn't just a personal win, it was a small cultural shift in our division, where substance was finally valued over superficial flash. I learned a few profound lessons from the whole experience. First, always have an insurance policy. That little watermark, that tiny act of professional self-defense, was the difference between me being a victim of corporate theft and me becoming a successful strategist. Protect your work in ways that are invisible to the careless eye but undeniable to the meticulous one. Second, strategic patience is better than angry reaction. My initial impulse was to jump up and scream, to engage in a messy, unwinnable catfight. By stepping back and letting Tom present the evidence of his crime, I allowed his arrogance to become my witness and the client to become the judge. I traded short-term emotional satisfaction for long-term, irreversible professional victory. And finally, the right audience recognizes true value. Tom's audience, the people in the office easily impressed by big talk and power gestures, were fooled. But the one audience that mattered, the highly discerning, integrity-focused client like Mr. Harrison, saw past the performance and immediately spotted the lie. When you do genuinely excellent work, you can trust that the right people, the people who actually matter, will recognize it. I settled into my new office. The glass wall felt less like exposure and more like transparency, a signal that my success was built on visible, solid work. The OmniCorp account became a resounding success, leveraging my innovative strategies, and I went on to lead many more high-profile projects. Tom Stevens. He became a non-person. A Google search on his name, if you knew where to look in the corporate legal filings, might hint at a professional separation due to conduct issues, but he vanished from our world. He stole my idea and I let him present it. He thought he was taking my career. Instead, he accelerated it. The moral of the story isn't just that cheaters never prosper, but that sometimes the best revenge isn't a confrontation, it's a strategically executed, spectacular demonstration of your own undeniable merit. And that, my friends, is a lesson I carry with me every single day. If you enjoyed this story of quiet, professional justice, and you've got a little bit of that strategic patience in you, don't forget to drop a comment, like, and subscribe for more stories from the office hours.